and the film industry? Because such a
Well, that's a good question to open up with because I want to make sure that we streamline which Peter Ackerman I am, because believe it or not, there are three out there.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So there is a Peter Ackerman who is a author of a book on global peace. That's not me. There is the Peter Ackerman who was the producer of shows like Ice Age and The Americans. And that's not me. He actually moved from New York to LA when I got out of show business. So I'm the Peter Ackerman, and that's why I use my middle initial in my book, Peter K. Ackerman. And my book is Mom, Dad, Me, and Classic TV. And I grew up with classic television icons as parents.
Yeah.
Those same parents of mine sort of inspired me. And I went first as an actor, didn't do much of note, and we can talk about that. And then I got into production and I worked mostly administrative work on shows like Friends. I worked on Friends for 2 seasons as an assistant to a line producer. And then
Amazing.
I felt that show business wasn't what I was called to and moved on from that. But anyway, my book deals with really the showbiz aspect of my life.
Let's just stop on that. Working on Friends.
I want to know which
What's
episodes.
that? We can't just skip that. We can't
You
just...
just threw that at us. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that is part of my story. And I was working as again, the assistant to the line producer for seasons 2 and 3. Really, when the show took off at the end of season 1 is when I started. So it was a great time to come in and work on a hit show. And it was also a great time when you're on a hit show, doing what basically my parents had done, working in television, and realizing I wasn't fulfilled in that and that there was something else for me. And what better opportunity to realize I'm unfulfilled than being on a hit show. So that's kind of where Friends comes into play as the last thing that I'm going to
How
do.
was it when something you were working on suddenly you just when you start realizing this is going to be big and then this is going to be really big?
Right. On Friends, because I started in season 2, it had already kind of hit that crest. I came
Yeah.
on to my job right when the reruns were starting. The cast and crew had just broken for the summer break when my boss brought me on because his assistant left. And suddenly Friends was becoming this big thing and everybody knew it. And it kind of exploded that second year. It just fully established itself as this hit show. And so I kind of just stepped into it. I didn't have to be at any of the nail biting in the first season, like, is
Oh,
this
wow.
going to go? Are people going to watch it? Is it going to get canceled?
Yeah.
That was a relief.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we just couldn't carry on. But I just couldn't let that go. We just slipped it in. We were in because Friends was globally was absolutely massive.
It was a phenomenon. Yeah, it still is.
Sure.
So,
Still is a wonderful show. And
yeah.
I, and a great way to kind of bookend my show business connected career, because that's the life I grew up in. One of my earliest memories, and you'll guide me, and I can introduce who my parents are at some point here.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'll start with my mother, since
Yeah.
The American holiday Mother's Day is almost upon us. So I'll start with Mom. My mom is an actress named
Yeah.
Eleanor Donahue, Elinor.
Yeah.
She was known in a show in the late 50s called Father Knows Best.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was Andy Griffith's girlfriend, the pharmacist on the first season of the Andy Griffith Show, and so many more productions. She's even in the movie Pretty Woman. She's the nice sales lady who helps Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. My mother's had this fantastic career. And one of my earliest memories was sitting on her lap, and a rerun of Father Knows Best came on the television, which was every weekday at 4 o'clock. And she pointed at me. She goes, "Look, honey, look, there's mommy on the screen." And I saw my mom walk
Yeah.
through a doorway and say her line. And I realized, oh, my mom's on this thing called television. And so that's, again, one of my earliest memories. And then the beautiful part about growing up is my dad was a TV executive producer. Before then, when he was working as the vice president in charge of West Coast production for CBS, he was instrumental in getting radio shows made into TV shows. So he was instrumental in birthing I Love Lucy as a television show,
Wow.
Wow.
and Gunsmoke and more. But he loved making programs himself. And the one I spent the most time on the set on was Bewitched.
Yeah.
Oh
Wow.
my God.
He also did The Flying Nun and Gidget and Dennis the
Yeah.
Menace and all those shows.
I know you want me to speak into this thing, but I'm not going that way. You have to bring it here.
Wow, some of those programs, yeah, they're probably some of the biggest programs of the last century.
Yeah, yeah. And again, just classic television is big. You know, I think people in this world today with so many choices and there's so much division and everything else, they want to go back to that kind of peaceful time where in a 30-minute TV show, all problems can be resolved in a satisfactory way. And there was
Yeah.
grace and love abounding within family and friends. And it was just a nice slice of life to retreat to, even though it maybe didn't mirror the real life. It was a nice
Yeah.
place to retreat to. And so that's why I think my parents' shows are still popular today.
And one thing I do pick up sometimes on that is that I know in the US you probably had a lot more TV shows than we did and stations, but growing up myself, we had 3 channels, which did mean that people had
I
a
had
connection.
5.
You had 5, did you? You're trying to pretend you're younger than me, but
Pretend. Listen to you.
yeah. But the fact that was not such a big multi-television, you could watch Netflix and pick and choose your time you wish to watch. It was a unifying factor that so everybody would watch Bewitched, and
Right.
and you know, at the workplace or at the schoolyard there would be the conversations. So TV was very much a unifying factor.
It was, you're right. And it didn't separate us, as you just said, into further tribes or pools of people who watched or didn't watch or who
Yeah.
subscribed to this or don't subscribe to that. Yeah, everybody was part of the, maybe this is too large. I was going to say national conversation, but it was certainly large.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes international conversation.
Yeah.
Because
Everybody
I'm
knew
sure
what was going
Bewitched
on.
was probably in Spanish, it was probably in French, it was
Yeah.
probably in many languages, whereas either dubbed or subtitles, probably dubbed at that time. Yeah, which would be
Yeah.
quite interesting to see your mother being dubbed.
Yeah. I don't know that I have though. Now that you mention it, I'm trying to think.
Maybe so.
I might have seen her in Spanish at one point. So
Yeah. Research. Sorry to interject there, but I just was this is fascinating times. So for you, you're growing up with all of this, and that was your wonderful seeing.
And I didn't know how special it was. It was just what my parents did. And in fact,
Yeah.
I remember about 3 years after that first memory that I just shared, I was with my friend down the street, Johnny, and I was playing with him, and we were about to part ways for the day. And something that was bothering me, I finally asked, and I said, "My mom's on Channel 5 at 4 o'clock. When is your mom on?"
Oh, brilliant!
That's what, and he looked at me like the idiot I was and said, "Peter, not everybody's mom's on television." Oh, that's when I
That's
got
wonderful.
it. That this wasn't something everybody did.
It's crazy.
And so I got to go to the studio a lot. I've already talked about it. I'd go to the set of Bewitched when my dad was still working for Screen Gems and was helping to oversee their shows. I had free range to go onto many sets, including the Partridge Family. I remember once being on the set of the Partridge Family, and David Cassidy called me and my friend over and asked me to sit on the couch with him. And he said he was working on a song and played it for us. And at the time, it was just, I was at my dad's work. I didn't realize how special it was until maybe 10 years ago. I realized, wow, I lived a very privileged life with great
Why
experience.
so late, do you think, though? And I mean, is this what's led you down into the route of being an ordained minister? And it is minister, isn't it? For an Episcopal.
Well, in the Episcopal Church, we can be called
Yeah.
ministers. We're also ordained priests. Different from Roman Catholicism, we clergy can be married and have children, and I am and do. And I think the reason why it didn't really hit me is that my parents, despite being, again, I'm hoping I'm not overusing the word, saying icons
Yeah.
in classic television, they didn't raise us as royalty.
Yeah.
We weren't made to feel elite or over anybody else. So if my friend was from the wrong side of the tracks, that was okay. He was my friend, and I wasn't. My life wasn't managed that way. So again, going to the studio with Dad, meeting Sally Field, or hanging out with Elizabeth Montgomery, and just going to the Western Street at Paramount Studios with my friends and just playing cowboys on the Western Street was just going to work with Dad. It was nothing special. and my parents didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just their jobs. And so it took me a while to kind of realize, oh yeah, that was special because not everybody gets to do that.
So do you miss it then, or is that, or do you still engage? That's the other thing. Are you still writing? Are you still involved in
New
creative?
book,
I think the book,
Yeah.
the new book.
right. No, I had tried, I remember, I tried my hand at acting and did a few things, nothing of note. And that constant auditioning and not getting the part and having to wait tables in order to pay for the pictures and resumes that always the agents wanted them updated.
Yeah.
I don't miss that. And then in production, when you were on a new show, we sort of already talked about this, and you were kind of biting your nails. Is this one going to go? Is it going to keep on? And then even if it kept on in the season, there was no guarantee that the production staff above you would hire you for the next season. You were
Right.
really working season to season. So your palms were sweating, am I going to have a job next fall? And I don't miss that. And but I love the industry. I love the experiences I've had. I love the people who I've met, many who I'm still friends with. And this book gave me an opportunity to do two things that I really wanted to do. The primary one was to keep my parents and their contributions in the public conversation about classic television. And then I also wanted to be able to stay in touch and maybe go to some of these nostalgia shows, autograph shows, meet the fans of my parents, to tell my stories and meet their colleagues and friends and the friends who I've met in the industry. So that's the other reason why I wrote it.
And as that with the book being out, how's that happened? Has that opened doors? Have you had connections from people saying,
I haven't, because I have a full-time vocation. And again, just to round that part out, I've been serving now for, I think, 17 years. I'm an ordained Episcopal priest, and I serve a parish in Maryland, and which is on the East Coast of the United States. And that's a full-time vocation. I am booked every day. I'm also a hospital chaplain at our local hospital. So I've got a lot to do, a sermon to craft for every week, administrative responsibilities.
Yeah.
So I haven't branched out. That's my long way of answering your question.
yeah,
And I haven't done any autograph shows yet. I figured that's down the line.
yeah,
This September, I am going to a place called Mount Airy, North Carolina, which hosts a week-long celebration of the Andy Griffith Show called
Oh, wow.
Mayberry Days. And I'm going to be going to Mayberry Days, and I may be a guest speaker, and I'm sure I'm going to have a table with my book and be able to sign and meet some of the fans. So that is going to happen.
brilliant.
Can I?
Yes, certainly.
That's really incredible. But before you change topics, I'm going to ask this and ask you how realistic or unrealistic I'm being. As an actress, I really want to be a Star Trek captain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here in Ashford and Canterbury. I was in New York. I felt like I was closer to achieving that in New York.
Yeah.
But yes, I want to put it out there into the universe.
Okay.
You're an ordained priest. If I'm not going to, I might as well just share it with you, Peter, because, dreams are dreams, eh? How realistic am I being?
I think you're being very realistic. And one thing about Star Trek, my mother is on an episode of the original series called Metamorphosis. And on Metamorphosis, she played a very strong female character. And remember, that episode was made around the middle 1960s, and women were still seen as housewives and mothers only, and not strong characters. And she played a very strong character in that. And we know from all the Next Generation series and beyond that the franchise really values strong women, sense of humor, everything else. So to me, there's no reason why you can't be a starship captain. So may that go to the universe and happen.
Definitely. And I very actually look forward to SAMSERA being
I think you could be a
going to
Klingon.
space, actually, going into space.
Thank you, Craig.
While we're talking about the book, we really should tell our listeners where they can get the book.
Yeah.
Certainly, the easiest places are Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, and it's available as an ebook, basically a paperback, and there's also a hardback version, so you can get it in either way. And I think Amazon Prime subscribers can actually read it for free. So it's available, it's out there.
Without giving too much away from the book, but I'd just like to grab a couple of stories from you of your choice, although we'd be quite interested to know how your mother and father met.
Yes.
Definitely.
Well, they met in Hollywood, of course. Dad originally was from Albany, New York, and made it to California for his job for CBS and stayed. He was divorced with 2 children. He was 25 years older than my mother, and they met around the time he was the president of the TV Academy, and my mother was nominated for a Best Supporting Actress role in as her role of Betty Anderson in Father Knows Best. And so, in one of the pre awards luncheons or something, I know they met. That might have been the first time. And then when Father Knows Best concluded, my dad hired her for a pilot episode of a TV show, and that sealed the deal. They were dating by that time. The pilot didn't get picked up and didn't get made into a TV show, but my mother continued working on that first season of the Andy Griffith Show. And during all that time, they realized that marriage was in the cards and they wanted to start a family together. And so she left Andy Griffith basically for my dad. And so a year later, I was born, and 2 brothers followed me. And my dad adopted my mom's son from a previous marriage, and
Wow.
that made the 4 of us living under the roof with them. So that was a little bit how they met and how we came along.
Are your siblings similar to you in that they, understand the experience that you lived in and what that meant? And are any of them creative as well? Or how different and how similar are you based on it? Because I'm always fascinated by that, how children from the same parents can be so different as
Yeah.
individuals. Yeah.
Very different. How do I say this? My mother, when I finally got into acting, she resisted. She didn't want any of her sons to go into acting. And when I kept resisting, I would just try out for plays in high school, get cast, do them. And when I got out of high school, she said, "All right, I'll support you if this is what you want to do, but make me one promise. When you find something else that brings you as much joy as performing does, you'll follow that something else." And I said, "Yes, Mom." And that has served me well in life. And so I think that lesson was given to all of my brothers. Do what you love. Do what you love, and the rest will follow. So the oldest brother, Brian, who actually played with young Ronnie Howard on the set of the Andy Griffith Show. Brian has nothing to do with television. He is the captain of a research vessel in Northern California. And so that's what he does. Very dashing and heroic kind of work he does as a sea captain. My younger brother, James, is about to retire as the president and CEO of a organization called Prison Fellowship out here in the States, which helps lower the rate of people going away from prison and back into prison and supporting the families while their loved ones are incarcerated. So he's been a part of that organization for years, and he'll be semi-retired after that. And then my baby brother, Chris, kind of takes the best of both worlds. He works for his local city in Southern California in the transportation department, but he also has a side gig as Crazy Chris, and he goes out to motorcycle races and acts as the on-track announcer, Crazy Chris Ackerman. And he also was a heavy metal singer, and his band has gotten back together, so they're doing some things with that. So
Brilliant.
I love it.
so a little showbiz in there, a little
Definitely.
public
Definitely.
work, and but for some reason, I'm the one who really took to what my parents did, and I think it happened on the set of Batman. So in
You're talking about the original classic Batman, right?
the original
Okay.
classic Adam
Yeah,
West,
man. Oh God.
the Batman, and
Yeah.
my brother Brian and I loved that TV show, and my dad knew the producer of the show. So as a treat, we piled in the car one day, the 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Brian, and I, and we went to 20th Century Fox Studios and onto the Batman set. And I got to meet Adam West, have my picture taken with him. And at some point, my brother Brian and I walked when they were doing a setup and there was really nothing going on. We walked around the soundstage, and on the soundstage was the set for Wayne Manor, the living room set for Wayne Manor, which had
wow,
the
yeah.
bookcase where you could see the bat poles that the characters would slide down into the bat cave. And I see that as where I became me, in that we walked over to the bat poles, and I fully expected to look down and see the bat cave below, and instead I saw about a 5-foot drop with a bunch of fluffy pillows down. And I realized what a fork in the road that was. I could have become so disillusioned with
Yeah.
fakery that I turned
Yeah.
away from it. And instead, as I looked down at No Bat Cave and just at a bunch of pillows, I realized, oh, we're doing magic here. This is
Yeah.
pretend. I
Yeah.
love this. And I wanted to be a part of it ever since.
That's a wonderful story. Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to, well, we've got you here because it's lovely to, so lovely to talk to you. A couple more stories, but we've got one about John Lennon, I know.
Yeah. So that was a kick. My mother was on a show called The Odd Couple as a semi-regular. She played the girlfriend of one of the characters named Felix Unger, who was played by an actor named Tony Randall. And one day she was on the set and the script supervisor gasped. And my mother looked up at her, the script supervisor, said, "What's wrong?" And she goes, and she's pointing to the audience seats. And there was no audience. They were just doing a run through before the show filmed that night. And the script supervisor pointed and said, "There's John Lennon." And sitting in the front row during what is known as his long weekend in LA, which was many years, was John Lennon, May Pang, Julian, and a young boy who was with Julian. And my mother knew that my brothers and I were Beatle fans. So she grabbed a piece of a script and just tore it off, took a pencil that she was using to make notes in her own script, and walked over and said, "Oh, Mr. Lennon, will you please give me an autograph for my boys?" And sure enough, for many years, we owned the autograph that said, "To Brian, Peter, James, and Chris, love, John Lennon." And
Amazing. Yeah.
what I learned later is I met via email May Pang, and I was talking to her about that event, trying to get what she remembered. And she said, "Oh, I was so excited to meet your mother." And after she left, I turned to John and said, "Do you know who she is?" Because May Pang knew Father Knows Best and Andy Griffith and all that. And
Yeah.
John said no. He had no idea who she was because I guess those shows didn't make it to England
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
time, or at
yeah.
least he was doing other things and not watching TV. So
It's fascinating. You said at the time you owned it. So do you know where it is now? The autograph, the piece
I
of
don't.
paper?
I downsized. Part of the fun about being an Episcopal priest is we get to find our own jobs.
Yeah.
So we're not moved around. And so whenever Marie and I have been in a place in our lives where we say, okay, it's time to move on, we get to look at the want ads and figure out where to go. And that is fun, but moving always, not always. I think since 2019, we moved across the coasts twice.
Yeah.
And at some point in the midst of all that, we realized if we're going to move, and one day we're going to retire, we're going to need to downsize. So let's downsize sooner rather than later, and let's build up our financial portfolio so that when retirement comes, it can be a little more comfortable. And so I decided for some of these mementos to get rid of them. So I put that one up for auction through an auction house, and I don't know what it went for or to whom it went, but it went.
It went. So, well, we don't want to get too much of the book away because otherwise our listeners are not going to buy it. But we'd like to get.
That's not true.
No, that's not true.
It's
is it?
not true,
Let's
no.
get. Can we pick a couple more stories for it?
Yeah.
I'm fascinated.
All right. Well, I think one of my favorite stories that I love to tell is I'll go back to the set of Bewitched. And Elizabeth Montgomery and her husband, the director of Bewitched, Bill Asher, were married at the time. And our families were very close. And I'll give you two memories. The onset memory I have is Liz was just like her character, Samantha. She had a little bit of a pixie in her, and she loved to play practical jokes. And one day I was visiting the set, and I guess I was given free rein, and I was walking around, not knowing that it was one of the days she was filming as the other character she played on the show, Serena, her cousin, where she had a black wig and she put a mole on her face. And she was in Serena makeup. And I didn't know that that was Liz. And so Serena came up to me and got on her haunches and said, "So, honey, how are you?" And I said, "Fine." And who are you? And I said, "Well, I'm Peter Ackerman. I'm the son of Harry Ackerman, the executive producer." And she said, "Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm new to the show." And then she leaned in and asked me, "What's the star of the show really like?" And I said, "Oh, Liz, she's really nice." She goes, "Oh, that's good to know." And then she got called off to the set. And it took me years to find out and realize that was Liz, and that she was playing a trick on me. And then outside, we were at an event once, and our families were sharing a limousine from the event. And on the way back to the car, I asked a question, not realizing that Liz Montgomery got asked this all the time and really hated the question. But I said, hey, Aunt Liz, will you wiggle your nose for me?
Oh, yeah.
And she said, wait. And she didn't react. She just sort of said out of the side of her mouth, wait until we're in the limo and ask me. And we were in the limo, and I asked her again, and she leaned into me. We were sitting across from one another. She said, Peter, you have to make me a promise. I will wiggle my nose for you, but I will only do it once, and you'll never ask me again. And I said, okay. And she did, and I never asked her to do it again. So those are just...
I think these are fascinating stories, but you touched also on something really important, and that's your mother's advice. I packed up an entire life. I've always been a singer musician, and I come from a background where it wasn't seen as a way to make a living. So I lived a life as a techie and a corporate person, but a musician and actor by night. So it's a long journey, but that's a really important thing that you said. And what advice would you give beyond that? There are so many people now who want to find their passion and their purpose. I mean, I genuinely felt like, okay, I've got to turn this ship around because I'm going the wrong way. I'm running out of time. That's how I felt.
Right.
And so I dedicated myself to my creativity. That's what I want to express in my life. And yeah, there's lots of other moving parts, and it's not easy, and it can be so brutal. But what advice could you offer to people who are asking that same question? And there's lots about artistry and creativity, but I just thought it was so important, the advice that your mother gave of, do what you love, but be open to finding that thing that might not be this. Because other actors have said that if you don't love this and love it and there's nothing else you want to do, then great. But if there's something else, go do that.
Right. And that's what happened to me. The reason I got out of acting really was my dad hurt his leg. He was producing the last show he ever produced called The New Gidget. It was a syndicated series in the middle 1980s. He had had surgery on his knee and needed someone to drive him for a couple of weeks. And I said I would do it. And by driving him, I got to go with him, and I got to casting sessions, editing sessions. I got to see firsthand all aspects of the show, not just hanging out on the soundstage. And I suddenly realized that, oh, there's great work here. There's creative work here. And that's what led me into working in production for many years on commercials, music videos, and eventually, as we talked about, in television. So I would say to anybody else, taking my story, but making it more accessible, because not everybody's born into the family where they have somebody that they can follow, is get with people who do what you want to do. If you want to be in broadcasting, take a broadcaster to lunch, or somebody who works in a broadcasting office to lunch. Find out what it's really like. Find out how one gets started in there. And then you kind of learn. You learn the avenues and the doors, and inevitably, and this is the way it usually happened for me, there was always somebody willing to give you a number. Joe called me recently because he was looking for more people to do this entry-level job. Why don't you give Joe a call? And you'd call Joe. He may not be able to help you, but he'd give you the number for Sally, who you'd then call. And eventually a door would open, and walk through it and see what happens.
Oh, Peter, it's been fascinating to talk to you. Have a great luck with the book. It sounds fantastic. I've got a very question you may choose not to answer. Mum, Dad, me, and Classic TV. Do you have a favourite Classic TV? That may be a bit unfair. Is there something you'd love to see relaunched, or perhaps a show you would love to have been in?
Well, I've got to say, when you ask that question, I go back to my parents' shows. And it is actually the one, I know they made a movie of it, but I never want to see them do anything with it again. And you can guess what it is, because I've talked about it plenty here, is Bewitched.
Oh,
that is my favorite. I have thoughts about this
too. Show. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much indeed, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And we'd love to have you back on as
we have to continue
as a guest again in the future. And if you're ever in the United Kingdom, we're about 35 minutes from London, from the studio. We'd love to have you from the centre of London. We're very accessible, so we'd love to have you come down and visit us. And we can have the whole show.
I have visited Liverpool, so if I go back, I'll visit.
Amazing.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And we're going to play you a couple of those artists you spoke about, Mr. John Lennon and David Cassidy as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. What a lovely interview. That'll be available on Listen Again. Peter K.